Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, OCAT Conducting Safe Domestic Violence Screening and Referrals. My name is Patrick Hyman. I'm a OCAT Technical Assistance staff member. And before we sort of dive into today's webinar, I did want to just pass along a few OCAT related updates. From what I understand, they're working on the next release of OCAT 1.6, which will be scheduled for deployment at the end of July. And as part of that next release, some of the major changes will include additional password security and a warning message when entering a new case for an existing client based on a matching CIN, or client identification number. And just a friendly reminder, if you are having problems with your OCAT user account, if you are locked out or you can't reset your password, please contact one of your designated OCAT county administrators. If you call the help desk for one of these types of issues, they're going to go ahead and refer you back to your county administrator. So save yourself a step there. And as of last week, we have over 75,000 clients that have been appraised using OCAT. So that's great news. And I think very pertinent to today's conversation, of that 75,000, 25% identified themselves as a potential victim of domestic abuse, related conflict or other safety issues, and 4% concerns for their safety or the safety of their family. So today we are extremely pleased to have Ann Menard presenting for us. Ann is the CEO of the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, and she'll be presenting to us around ways to provide safe and culturally sensitive strategies for conducting domestic violence screening, assessment, and referrals. I think most folks are in agreement that domestic violence screening and referral, it's obviously very crucial to ensuring client safety, but it can be challenging, can be daunting to start that conversation on such a sensitive issue. So on that point, Ann is going to talk through ways to create an informed, safe environment where clients feel comfortable disclosing domestic violence and identifying the assistance that they need. So in terms of logistics, really quick, please feel free to type any questions you may have during the webinar into the questions box and click send. And then we'll allow time at the end of the presentation for Ann to answer your question. You should also be able to see 3 domestic violence resources in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to peruse those. I know Ann's going to review each of these documents briefly at the end of her presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Ann. And if you're speaking, I think you're still on mute. Okay, slight technical issue, as is the way with webinars. Give us 1 sec. Sorry, folks, to clear this up. And if you are... Okay, great.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, that was at your end. Okay, good. Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Patrick, for that introduction. And since this is a webinar and I can't see you, we wanted to get some information about who was in the room, so to speak. We have 2 short polling questions, which we'd like to pull up now. The first one asks you, it gives us a sense of who's participating. So you'll see a poll in a minute. There we go. So if you could let us know, check one of those boxes. and we'll all get a sense of who's on the webinar today. And Nicole or Patrick, whenever you've got some results, if you could read them off, because I think, once again, I won't be able to see them.
Yep, so and it looks like we have around 69% of folks are case managers, 15% are supervisors, 6% are administrators, and 10% are other.
Excellent, thank you. Why don't we pull up the next poll, which is, I want to get a sense of your current comfort level of discussing domestic violence with CalWORKs clients. And whenever you're ready with results.
Okay, so we have kind of across the board here. 17% said very uncomfortable, 13% said somewhat uncomfortable, 13% are neutral, 36% said somewhat comfortable, and 21% said very comfortable.
Great. Okay, thanks. I'm going to pull up the slideshow again. Hopefully get it moving. Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Patrick said about sharing any comments or questions as we go along, and we'll try to get to some of those questions at the end of the webinar. We have learned a lot from survivors themselves, domestic violence survivors themselves, about how to conduct safe screening and referral in a variety of settings. We've also learned what makes it difficult to share their experiences and what actually serves as a barrier, the kinds of things that make it almost impossible. And it's that learning that I'm going to share with you today as an important foundation for this important domestic violence screening and referral role that you have as CalWORKs caseworkers. So let's get started. I wanted to start with the vision and set of beliefs framed by the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is the federal funding stream providing support for the 1,200 domestic violence shelters and non-residential programs across the country, including California. They think that we will make great progress in this country in addressing domestic violence if all public and private agencies serving families embrace these beliefs and use them to frame their work with families. Because really, if you're serving families, you are serving adults and children impacted by domestic violence. So the first of those beliefs is that every human services provider can recognize domestic violence and its impact, react appropriately with trauma-informed strategies that are appropriate in that setting, and they can refer victims and their children to appropriate services and assistance. Two other vision and overarching beliefs: that victims and their dependents can heal, they can recover, and they can thrive through integrated services across multiple systems. We know about what builds resilience and what helps survivors recover. We also believe that we can collectively prevent future violence by promoting emotional well-being and healthy relationships. So I thought that was a nice framing for our discussion today. I want to start, before we talk about the elements of a good response to domestic violence, I wanted to review the definition of abuse in the California DSS Manual of Policies and Procedures. I'm hoping that you're familiar with this. And the ways in which domestic relationships are defined in those policies. There are a number of terms that are used, sometimes interchangeably, to describe violence between intimate partners. And those include interpersonal violence, intimate partner violence, battering, and marital violence. Violence is the most common and the one that we'll be using today. And you can see from this definition in CalWORKs regulations that California describes it in the context of CalWORKs as assaultive or coercive behavior, which includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, economic control, stalking, isolation, threats, or other types of coercive behaviors occurring within a domestic violence domestic relationship. And then again, you can see the types of relationships that are included there. There are several key elements of this definition. Domestic violence typically involves a pattern of abuse, not a single incident, and involves the use of a range of tactics, which you see described here, designed to control another person, control who they see, what they do, how independent they are, what decisions they make. Domestic violence then can be distinguished between fights that get out of hand or disagreements between couples that are pretty common in relationships, which, while problematic, do not have the short and long-term impacts of domestic violence and the coercive control that really defines it. If we were in the room together, I would ask you what comes to mind when you hear the term domestic violence, and my sense is that you would likely brainstorm many of the things that are listed above. Given that domestic violence affects over 12 million individuals a year, and based on ongoing surveys conducted by the Centers for Disease Control, I can assume that many of you have experienced abuse yourselves in a teen or adult relationship, or have grown up as children in a home in which their parent was abused. And while this may give us insights that are helpful, we should keep in mind in our professional roles that our story may differ significantly from another person's story, including what happened, its impact, and the options and resources available. This next slide is another important headline that I want to underscore. If we're just looking for physical violence, black eyes and bruises, we will miss a great deal of what constitutes domestic violence, and with direct implications for the protections or support you might offer a client that you're working with. For example, stalking is a huge and frightening part of domestic violence for too many victims, even after they have left the abusive relationship. Threats to harm or take the children are a key indicator of risk. An abuser's threat to commit suicide is often nothing more than a powerful tactic to keep a victim from leaving out of guilt. Economic abuse, ruining a partner or ex-partner's credit, withholding access to money for food or other necessities, sabotaging employment or education is also common within abusive relationships and can make it economically hard or impossible for victims to leave or complicate their ability to meet CalWORK's work requirements. Immigrant victims of domestic violence can be threatened by their abusive partners with deportation and have their immigration documents withheld. And as we've already mentioned, another powerful aspect of domestic violence is an abuser's attempts, often successful, to isolate a partner from family or friends because someone who is cut off from support, information, and resources is easier to control. So help-seeking, basic help-seeking activities that a victim may engage in may actually increase their risk. We also know that from the work of researchers and practitioners that leaving an abusive relationship does not guarantee that violence and abuse will stop and may create new safety risks. So why didn't she just leave is really a misinformed question. Often stalking begins or escalates after a victim has left the abusive partner. Stalking can also escalate once a victim goes to work or seeks help, or once child support enforcement begins. When a victim leaves or attempts to leave an abusive relationship, threats to kidnap the children escalate, as do threats to harm other family members. A threat such as, I know where your mother lives, can be very frightening. So that's something that could be said in front of anybody, and it wouldn't necessarily raise any red flags because it seems like a benign statement. But survivors have told us that that's one of the most powerful threats that an abusive partner can give them. More powerful than even threats against victims themselves, because it suggests that someone who they care about is at risk and that risk may escalate depending on what the victim chooses to do. From other studies funded by the National Institute of Justice and the Centers for Disease Control, we also know that leaving an abusive relationship may be one of the most dangerous times for a domestic violence victim, with the risk of serious injury or death increasing significantly. Abuse also occurs during pregnancy, shortly after birth, time frames when paternity establishment and child support issues also emerge. So we also know that domestic violence is serious, affecting 12 million individuals a year. The vast majority of victims, over 85%, are women abused by a male partner, which is not to say that we can ignore male or transgender victims abused by either male or female partners, or women abused by female partners. They all and also deserve our full protection and support. Finally, we also know that domestic violence victims use TANF as a bridge out of an abusive relationship. Between 40 and 60% of current welfare recipients have experienced domestic violence in their lifetimes, with 25% in a current relationship, and that mirrors the California-specific data that Patrick shared. So what are some key elements of an effective domestic violence response? The first is to create safe opportunities for disclosure, and that's plural. Opportunities is plural. Although this may be challenging within the context of of your process in your offices, but we'll talk more about that as we go along. It's important that you respond in appropriate, culturally relevant ways. Here is one of the headlines from this training. There's a couple of headlines here, but this is one of them. There is no one victim experience. Each domestic violence victim's circumstances, their risks, and the resources will be different and may change. As an abusive partner's tactics of abuse change, again, often in reaction to what the victim is doing in terms of help seeking, so will the victim's need for safeguards. If stalking becomes a problem once a child support process starts, the risk of harm increases, and some additional protections may be necessary that weren't identified earlier. It's also important to note that there is not a stereotypical victim response. Not all victims will express fear or appear vulnerable. Many will express justifiable anger, and we've learned a lot over the 35 years that this issue has really been on our policy and practice radar screen of the incredible resilience and strength that survivors demonstrate every day. Another element is providing universal education about domestic violence protections and resources. This responds to the reality that some victims will never disclose to you. It's just too dangerous, or there's other considerations that keep that disclosure from being realistic. And we'll talk about that more. Training and capacity building. Domestic violence is complex. You deserve to be supported. This is a basic foundational training, but I hope that that there's more opportunities for you to talk about the particular role that you can play in our efforts to intervene in and prevent domestic violence. And finally, meaningful partnerships. Meaningful partnerships with domestic violence programs in your communities and other resources that will be helpful to your clients who are dealing with domestic violence. Another point I want to underscore is that screening is a means as opposed to an end. And what I mean by that is that it should not be just a box to check off, but a way to accomplish a set of related goals. The first of these is that it can underscore that violence or abuse in any form is not part of a healthy relationship. And if you think back to those statements of visions and beliefs initially, this is the role that you can play. You may be the first person who's helping a client understand that what's happening to them shouldn't be happening to them. It's wrong, and it's not part of a healthy relationship, just even though it might seem normal to them. And I say normal in quotes. Another important goal of screening can be that you can communicate that you care about the safety of all family members, which builds trust and engages individuals and couples from your community. Another goal here is that screening and assessment can help you refer someone who is at risk in their relationship, which is a really important role, and we're going to be talking about that more. All participants who are screened and receive information on community resources are better prepared to help themselves if necessary, but also to help family and friends who might need information on domestic violence protections and resources. It is actually a best practice to say something like, because domestic violence is so common, we make sure to provide information on domestic violence resources to all CalWORKS applicants. This is information you can use if needed now or at some later point, or you may have family members, friends, neighbors, or coworkers who you are worried about. That type of approach creates space for someone who is not safe enough to disclose or who chooses not to for other reasons, to still get information that then they can use, again, in their own ongoing safety planning. And finally, of course, you can use this information to make decisions about participation in and informed referrals to community resources, which is an important part of your role. So help seeking, just this, you can think about your own ways that you reach out for help when you need help, and what kind of gets in the way or makes it complicated. Again, we've learned a lot about what that looks like for domestic violence survivors, and a lot of their help seeking today is impacted by what has happened in the past or what aspects of their particular situation. So certainly exposure to multiple forms of abuse, including abuse at the hands of those who are supposed to help them. It could be other family members, it could be other systems player, and situations where the abuser has access to the program and perhaps to the decisions that the program will be making, and can influence the decision making. So this could be someone that they know or a relative of the abuser who works in your office. That's a big issue in smaller communities. Or if the abuser is a police officer, for example. Those are two examples. Obviously, that shrinks the pool of potential helpers and it increases danger because the victim is even more isolated. Another is the context of societal oppressions, including racism or discrimination against LGBT individuals. We have actually heard real feedback from survivors of color over the last few weeks who are now increasingly hesitant, or more hesitant than they were before, to call the police where their partner may be treated, out of fear that their partner may be treated unfairly by those same police. So here we have current events that are giving information to survivors that they are factoring into their safety planning what they want for themselves and their family, what they think will be helpful or not. So those are things that, again, diminish access, increase barriers to services, and increases impunity, increases abusers' sense that you're not going to call the police, you're not going to seek help because of these things I can hold against you. We've certainly for LGBTQ individuals, the threat of by their abusive partners is a pretty significant barrier to help seeking. Negative actions and attitudes of helpers, judgment, disbelief can color the ability to trust others, and or have survivors start questioning their own experiences. Victim blaming, questioning veracity reinforces a common tactic of abusers to say, "No one will believe you," which we've heard over and over again from survivors as a way of, as part of the tactic of isolating the survivor. So for some victims, disclosure is easy. They've already thought it through, and they are very clear that it would be helpful for them to tell you about their domestic violence. They understand its connection to the decisions that you have to make, and they may feel that they're out of current danger, whatever. It's easy, and I'm less concerned about them. As for a significant number of other survivors, where the decision to disclose is challenging, and there are many reasons why someone would choose not to talk about the abuse that they're experiencing. The victim may be afraid for their own or their children's safety. An abuser may have made serious threats, such as, if you ever tell anyone, I'll hurt you and the kids, I'll make sure you never see the kids again. Powerful threat for a mother, and may have made good on some of those threats in the past. They may not feel safe in your office. There may be many reasons for this. There may not be enough privacy to talk about the abuse. The process of applying for benefits or services through your office may feel overwhelming, particularly for someone who is daily dealing with safety issues. A victim may have had an experience with other systems that were abusive, making them very cautious. As I mentioned before, a friend or a relative of the abuser may work in your office. The victim may feel that it is too dangerous to reveal the abuse they're experiencing. This is especially true, again, in some small rural offices, or if the victim has to use a translator who is part of a close-knit immigrant community. They may be afraid of losing benefits or services if they tell your office staff. If the process of getting benefits or services is confusing, they may need some time to understand their rights and responsibilities before they can share this kind of sensitive information. A victim may have many reasons to believe that talking about the abuse can only make their situation worse. They may have told a neighbor or a friend who didn't believe them, or made them feel that the abuse was their fault. They may have confided in a family member who then told the abuser, resulting in serious injury. So often, one of the biggest factors about whether someone is comfortable disclosing domestic violence to you may be what happened the last time they disclosed. So you may be doing everything right, but they remember what happened the last time, and they bring that into their office with you, which is why, trust building and giving survivors information about why you're asking and what you're going to use this information to do is critically important. Okay, so as I said, we've heard both what doesn't work, but also what does support disclosure. The first of these is messages that say you are that this is an informed, safe place to disclose. Your office, where they're walking in, where they're applying for benefits, or where they're meeting with you if they're a current recipient. So what is your office or your waiting room, the materials, communicate to domestic violence victims about whether this is a safe place to disclose domestic violence. And I want you to mentally walk into your offices right now, or the waiting room, or the intake room, and are there indications that you understand domestic violence might be an issue, you care about it, you're going to be knowledgeable and helpful if they tell you that this is something that they're dealing with now. And one of the handouts I'll go through, and it was a request from the last session that we did about domestic violence awareness resources, particularly in multiple languages. So put together a little handout with some links to where you can get posters and tear-off sheets and other kinds of things. But do that mental inventory about where you can do a better job of communicating to someone who's coming in dealing with domestic violence and not sure whether that's something they're going to share with you. The second is making sure that what are the messages that say that you are an informed, safe person to tell? Are you nervous? Are you, obviously avoiding asking these questions or raising this? They're going to pick up on that. If you're not comfortable hearing about domestic violence, they're not going to tell you about domestic violence. So, some of you indicating that you're pretty comfortable talking about domestic violence, and hopefully you can share some of the things that got you to that place of comfort with some of your colleagues who may have answered the poll at the beginning that they were not so comfortable if you're located in the same offices. This is a tough thing to talk to folks about, but it's going to, getting yourself into a place of confidence and being open to hearing about domestic violence is a real important aspect of this. A third is what supports disclosure is a clear understanding of how the information will be used. I've referenced this, but I want to underscore that this includes understanding how and if the domestic violence information the victim provides will be shared with others in your office or within the community. A lot of survivors feel like if they tell anyone, if they're working, if they tell like a CalWorks worker, that you'll tell the employer that she or he is a domestic violence victim. They, certainly are concerned that you might say something to their abusive partner. What other agencies might you be sharing this information with or without their permission? So you know, the best antidote to inaccurate information that might be out there in the community is for you being very clear about why you're asking about domestic violence, why you're providing referral information to domestic violence, even to those that are not disclosing, like I described earlier, and how it will help you make good decisions about their application for benefits or continuation of benefits, work assignments, work supports, child support, child support cooperation decisions. So it's important that they have a really clear sense of that. They also need to know about the protections or accommodations that you can offer that will allow them to participate safely in work or child support. All of this should be explored in the context of their particular circumstances, concerns, interests, needs, and resources. They also need meaningful assurances of confidentiality and privacy. Victims have identified how important it is to be reassured that their privacy and confidentiality will be respected, and they themselves will be treated with respect and validation. So what are some of the some good assessment and screening and assessment practices? The first is really to build rapport. Domestic violence questions should not be the first questions that are asked, and again, should not be provided with, should not be asked without information that sets a context for why these types of questions are being asked of them. So a comfortable tone should be established. Again, if there's information in your waiting area, your intake, if there's ways that you can communicate that domestic violence is an issue that you care about, and that may have some implications for the decisions that are being made, that's really helpful. Ensure that any disclosure of abuse is confidential. Talked about that before. Survivors underscore that to us all the time as important. Explain why you're asking, again, giving that context. How will you use the information specifically? So saying something like, we can provide waivers from child support or work requirements for individuals in danger from an abusive partner. We know from, the other thing I want to tell you just from, I didn't want to bombard you with a lot of statistics, but we do know from both research and practice that most domestic violence victims want to work. They understand that that's part of economic independence, and to receive child support. But there's a big caveat: if they can do so safely. So they're not willing to, increase their risk in order to work or to pursue child support. But it's very important to them. Upwards of 96% of domestic violence survivors in one study on child support said that they absolutely wanted child support, again, if they could do so safely. So it's if you can do so safely is part of your job, exploring that with them. Ask clients directly about the abuse, and use terms. I think I have more on this later, so I'm just going to leave it at that right now. Define abuse broadly with physical, sexual, and emotional components. Just as many practitioners think of physical violence exclusively when they hear the term domestic violence, many victims themselves may not be recognizing. He may not have hit them for the last 2 years, because the last time he hit them, they ended up in the hospital. He doesn't need to hit her anymore. What he can do is just reference those things, reference the time she went to the hospital. He can do many other things that are not physical violence. So she may feel like what's happening now is the economic control, stalking behavior, non-physical abuse, emotional abuse, threats is not domestic violence because he hasn't hit her for 2 years. So really making sure that the understanding of what you're talking about, say what you're talking about. So we recommend that you use both open-ended probes and behaviorally anchored questions. And by that I mean questions like, are you afraid in your relationship? Are you afraid of what your partner might do if you pursue child support? Or if you go to work? Would there be types of work that might put you at risk? Like front office, we've heard from survivors that front office jobs make them feel more at risk than jobs that are in the, less exposed to stalking or other kind of threatening behavior. Can you safely get the verification documents we need as part of our application process? So those are all very specific types of questions that help you get the information you need, help the victim or survivor understand why you're asking the information. Avoid questions that force a victim to identify with a stigmatized status. And the best example of that is, are you a battered woman? First of all, that's not clear. People don't know what that means. But it also, survivors tell us it's not comfortable asking that question. It's much more comfortable asking questions about the impact, like some of the ones I just gave, that talk about whether certain things are going to put them at risk, and they can respond much more easily. Pay attention to cultural diversity, and I want to particularly lift up language access. California is a very diverse state. I don't need to tell you that. Make sure the applicant or client understands what you are exploring, and particularly appreciate the cultural context of a hesitancy to call the police, which is not seen as a resource or is seen differently as a resource in different communities, depending on the community's relationship, historical and current relationship with the police. There's different cultural contexts for telling a family secret, going outside the family with information, or to consider leaving a relationship, with both racial and ethnic context for that, but also religious context. So any perception that in order to get benefits and supports that they need or protections would require them to leave the relationship can be quite challenging. And again, this is why universally providing information about community resources is so important. Recognizing that people may not feel that they can disclose to you, but having information about how they can seek help in other ways that are more safe or at different times can be enormously helpful. Provide multiple opportunities for disclosure within interviews and over time. Again, a key takeaway, multiple opportunities to disclose and being prepared for the answers that may change as you ask the question multiple times. So a woman might not have thought that they were in danger, but then find out they are as their abuser's tactics change. Again, perhaps as part of help seeking or perceptions that they may be getting in the partner who's trying to control them is losing some of that control. Victims need to know when an application for a benefit might trigger contact with an abuser, a former abuser, and reactivate the abuse. The other thing that I'm saying here is that you need to have a plan to respond to different types of disclosures. There are disclosures like, he threatened to kill me on the way to the office. That's a disclosure, that's a crisis disclosure. That is, and they have occurred in TANF offices around the country. That is someone who's in immediate danger, and there needs to be a procedure within your office to get that person to a safe location and to explore those an immediate crisis response. That's different than a disclosure that from a victim who has acknowledges current abuse, but non-crisis abuse. So they're not in danger right now. They don't feel like they're in immediate danger, but they want some help, and they're concerned that as they become more independent through work or through child support, that might increase their danger, or again, the domestic abuse may have been from former partner, father of one of their children. She hasn't seen him for 6 years, but now as a result of applying for benefits, child support may be triggered and she's not sure what his reaction might be. And then there's also disclosures of abuse that has ended but left a very traumatized victim or child. And because of that trauma, they're not in a position to be able to go to work or to, and where child support, pursuing child support may not be appropriate. I'm going to show you how one state kind of organized this type of information in a desk guide. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say on that. Another important part of your response to domestic violence is referring victims who have disclosed for ongoing safety and planning. Ongoing safety planning and support. You are not being asked by me, and hopefully not by anyone else, to become a domestic violence advocate. But rather, we want you and need you to be a DV-informed caseworker who's prepared to make warm referrals, in other words, referrals that are informed, to DV services, and minimally make sure that everyone knows about domestic violence resources in the community, even if they don't disclose. So here are some of the markers of a healthy partnership with your local domestic violence program, and you can kind of assess where you are. There should be a length and depth of this partnership. You've been around for a long time. DV programs have been around for a long time. Ongoing consultation regarding DV plan development, implementation, refinement. So, how exchange of information about and support around how you can best make referrals to community resources, additional information about how your intake process can support disclosure and good response. Training or group facilitation partnerships with your program and coalition, and cross-training. It's important for your DV programs to understand how you do things at your office so they can do a good job of describing that to survivors that they're working with and supporting them as they're going through the process. But also, having them provide supplements to this, basic training that we're doing today. And resource development partnerships, developing your own bench cards or tailoring posters or other public awareness resources to your local community. If that's something as a result of this training you want to do more of. Resource development partnerships and training materials, brochures, policies. How can you make sure that new staff are giving domestic violence training, that staff who've been around for a long time but want refresher courses can really get that information as well. An established referral plan, make sure that you have accurate information about the resources in your communities. They can help you design community resource lists that it's a best practice typically to embed domestic violence resources within a larger community resources referral list, so that it doesn't inadvertently put someone in danger and suggest to an abusive partner that they were specifically asking for help around domestic violence. So again, your local program can help you design something that makes sense for the type of office that you work from. And if you have a really robust partnership, looking for ways to share resources to make sure that ongoing partnership is strong and well-resourced. So I'm sorry, their logo, I took this off the website, so the logo is a little fuzzy, but the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence is one of the 56 state domestic violence coalitions around the country. This is their website. They also, if you do not know, I hope this isn't the case, don't know of the domestic violence organization, domestic violence program, whether that's a shelter or a non-residential program, there's a listing on their website, and I encourage you to reach out to them. I think we have time. I'm going to do this. I want to, we did a study with Legal Momentum, a national survey in 2009, And I just wanted to lift out a couple of things that, were, I thought were particularly telling. The title at that time was not enough, what TANF offers family violence victims, because that was the experience of the over 600 respondents, which included individuals from all 50 states and Washington, D.C. Most of them worked at domestic violence or dual domestic violence, sexual assault programs. We also staff from legal aid or other anti-poverty programs, as well as 5% of those were TANF and child support agencies. So they obviously got a copy of the survey from their good partners at a domestic violence program. Most of the respondents provide direct services to victims. So at that time, what they were reflecting is really their current experiences. There were 3 key results. TANF is important to domestic violence victims. 96% of respondents agreed that TANF, or in your case, CalWORKS, is an important resource for domestic violence victims. TANF can make a significant difference when it works well, can make a significant difference when it does not work well. So it's just that the difference is in the wrong direction. I pulled out 3 quotes that I thought were kind of sum up what can happen when it works, and I have 2 of those good quotes, and another where it's not working very well. I had a case where a client showed up for an interview, was referred to me, picked up her children, and was helped to flee all in 6 hours. She literally did not have diapers or a bottle even. She was given transportation vouchers, clothing vouchers, diaper vouchers. Then TANF put her up in a hotel in a new community and helped her get into shelter there. It was incredible to see them all come together and take action. Overall, she left knowing that there are people who care and will pull out the stops to keep her and her children safe. And again, remembering back to my first slide, where what difference it can make, and we've heard this from survivors, what difference it can make when we work together and really help someone achieve safety. Here's another one. This is a respondent at what her clients say about TANF. I don't want to tell my worker about the violence. She'll just come and take the kids. A welfare check won't even pay my rent if I move out. I'll also need HUD assistance, and there's a huge wait list. I can't pay utilities or buy my medicine. My friend got TANF and got a part-time job through it, but the job made her child support go down. What's the point of trying? So these are, I'm not going to sugarcoat. These are realities. There are lots of challenges in communities with housing, with jobs, lack of both of those things, and many survivors, either because of the abuse or because they're also living in poverty, it's really an uphill climb. But we certainly don't want survivors in any community to feel like to be stuck in this place. Ending on a positive, when the victim gets a case manager who knows the system in family violence, it works well. They advocate for her, help her through the system instead of creating barriers. We recently had a victim facing lethal danger who needed to get safely to another state. The victim got her grant quickly and was able to get safely out. When our agencies work well together, we are able to save lives. So that's really the vision that, again, reflecting back on the vision. I have 3 handouts that I identified, and my email address is on the next slide, and I'm happy if you feel like there's additional information. One is just a 1-pager on disclosing domestic violence, which includes the, what gets in the way and what support disclosure. So it's just a really nice, reminder of these things that survivors have shared with us, plus it can be used as a checklist to see where you are, where your office is, where your colleagues are, and being in a good position to support survivors. I also included an example of a TANF caseworker bench card from Pennsylvania. It's a 2-sided document. They actually laminated it, recognizing that for some, in some offices they might only have a disclosure of domestic violence, once a week or once a month. So for some offices, they were having disclosures every week. So there was a lot, but it's easy to not necessarily to feel like you need a reminder of what you're doing. So this is Pennsylvania specific. but a lot of thought went into it, and I think it's a good resource. There's both again reminders about things not to do, the kinds of documentation approaches that could be used that attend to safety issues, some reminders about the dynamics of domestic violence, and steps in responding to domestic violence, again, that are reflect the different types of disclosures that might occur. One of the things we say is you shouldn't ask about domestic violence if you're not prepared to hear the answer and to do the right thing. So that may sound a little harsh, but it's sometimes better not to open up something and put someone in increased danger. And as a result of a question that we got at the last webinar a week ago, for domestic violence awareness resources in different languages, we have a number of, again, all of these are easily downloadable resources. We actually have a domestic violence understanding the basics e-learning module. It wasn't developed specifically for TANF caseworkers, but is a nice refresher course. It's got 10 sections and set up like an e-module that's available on our. I don't know if I put the link there, but you can go on. Oh, you know what? I didn't put the link there. That's kind of silly. You can go to our website, nrcdv.org, and find that, or email me if you have any trouble finding it. I'm going to put my email address up there. If that's something you're interested in, email me and I'll make sure you get the link. There's also a collection of awareness resources, and again, a number of different languages. The National Domestic Violence Hotline has a whole collection of materials in English and Spanish, brochures on hotline information, safety planning, power and control wheels depicting various aspects of domestic violence dynamics, including within immigrant or LGBT relationships, and other materials, again, that go to this point I made earlier about signaling in your intake office and in other places that you appreciate the importance of domestic violence and stand ready to help. So there's posters with tear-off tabs, palm cards, which are easier for survivors to take and hide, and a digital abuse awareness kit, which raises awareness of how abusers are making good use of our phones and other technology to continue to stalk and harass abusers as well, their abused partner, as well as track them. And there's also a link to the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, their resources page. And Patrick, the other thing I can do is just in like 10 minutes after we're done is I can send you another one of these with the link to the e-learning module. I don't know how that got cut off. If that's useful. So
yep, that'd be great.
And get it out to people, right? Because I know you're going to be getting it out to the folks who were on that last week.
Right.
Yep.
And Ann, if you're ready for it, okay, great. We got a few questions for you. Some came in via email and some came in via the chat box. So, let's go with one of the first questions here. This is pretty straightforward. Who is mandated to report domestic violence to law enforcement?
Okay. So it is this question came up at the last webinar as well. And I'm going to give you a partial answer, and then this is also something we're going to get you more information about. It is my understanding under California law that a mandated reporter must report, among other things, willful child endangerment or willful infliction of unjustifiable physical pain or mental suffering on a child. So I'm going to deal with that first. The fact that a child's parent or guardian has been the victim of domestic violence is not in and of itself a sufficient basis for reporting suspected child abuse or neglect. Further, a child's exposure to domestic violence incident in and of itself is not a sufficient basis for reporting suspected abuse or neglect. It is also my understanding that reporting domestic violence, and particularly injury, is in California is particularly directed to healthcare providers. But having said all that, it is important that you know the specific legal mandates that apply to you as in whatever your roles are within your offices, and that before screening for domestic violence, that you provide information to clients about your reporting requirements and the limits that places on the confidentiality that you can provide. I've asked for some specific guidance from the California Partnership, who I know provides this type of guidance to both on both reporting legal mandates to report domestic violence to the police, as well as requirements to report child abuse that may be occurring within the context of domestic violence. And I will share that with Nicole and Patrick, and they can get that out to you. So it's complicated. California actually has more complicated legal mandatory reporting requirements than a lot of other states. So I hope that helps, as opposed to having confused numbers. We'll get you more. I want to get you something in writing that I know is legally accurate and also includes some practice guidance that relates to that.
Perfect. Next question. How common is it to encounter a family in which both parents and or partners engage in abusive or violent behavior? And how do you assist or support an individual that is both victim and perpetrator?
Yeah, that's so one of the things we try to do is distinguish between, again, thinking back on the definition that I provided, where there's active coercion, control of a partner. It is, and that type of what we call domestic violence is different, as I said, from when you have couples that are pushing and shoving each other. Again, I'm not justifying that. That's but absent the intention to coerce or control in all of the ways that we were talking about earlier. So there's still, we're particularly concerned when you have an intimate partner controlling someone, again, what decisions they make, where they go, who they know, whether they work, whether they are able to make decisions in their own life. That may be very difficult for you to discern, given your, my guess, somewhat limited contact. And that's where your domestic violence partners can be really helpful to. If you believe that someone is in danger, you should be referring them to a domestic violence program. Domestic violence programs are able to work with, they don't assign the same staff, but are able to work with couples where both partners are being victimized and controlled by the other partner. It may be to different degrees, but to really sort that out and make sure that people are getting support they need, both around the abuse they're experiencing, but also their use of abuse in an intimate relationship. Both need to be addressed in those kinds of situations. We also know that the lethality in relationships where there really is mutual domestic violence, where both are engaged in serious abuse with potential long-term impacts, the lethality of those relationships is high. So it's important that intervention occurs, and again, I would that's where strong partnerships with community-based programs is going to be real important.
Great, thanks, Annette. And could you go back to slide 18 real quickly? Someone wanted to see that resource slide again.
This one?
Yeah, that must be it.
Is this the right one? Okay.
And we have time for one last question, and well, I'll do that in a second. So last question, what would concern clients about pursuing child support? Is it fear of retribution or not wanting to pay from the abuser? Or does the child support process somehow make it easier for the abuser to locate the survivor/client?
There are, I don't know what happened to the screen. What are you seeing, Patrick, on the screen? Something weird happened here.
I still see the presentation, but now it's in that kind of PowerPoint overview where you've got all the slides on the left. And
what I was trying to do, but let me see if I can do this. I want to get to the last slide. There we go. I know you wanted that put up. Child support. Yeah, there's all sorts of interesting information about child support. It may be that the victim is pursuing child support against, an abusive partner that's out of their lives. And part of the child support process may help him find her. And we've had that they, locate her and come back into her life. There may be, so her current location may be an issue. There may be certain types of child support enforcement strategies that she feels will put her at risk. For example, blocking a passport or seizing a boat that might bring an abusive partner back into her life. There may be concerns about visitation or parenting time that may be attached, depending on the child support office, may be attached to child support, and she may feel like her children may be more exposed to child sexual abuse or other types of danger. So depending, again, the kinds of risks that a survivor may identify and be fearful of are different. And we're doing a lot of training with child support. There are some ways that they can safely enforce child support. There's a number of resources. I can send you that link. Number of resources on the Office of Child Support Enforcement, a whole set of training materials that they developed about safely enforcing child support.
Great. Thank you, Anne. And I know we're a little over time, folks, and there were a number of questions that we didn't have time to get to. What we will do is we'll pass those questions on to Anne to get her feedback, and then we will post answers to those questions, and actually answers to all the questions along with the slides, the transcript, the audio recording, all of it to the OCAT Learning Center. So that'll be available for anyone to access and download. With that, Anne, thanks so much for the wonderful presentation. And for everyone in the audience, thanks so much for making the time to be here today. And with that, everyone have a great weekend. Anne, thanks again.
Thank you.